right, good morning, committee members. My name is Bernal. I'm the National Director for Stop Predatory Gambling. Um, our, our values is that we believe that people are worth more than money. We're a national nonprofit organization that we're in all 50 states. We attract members of all political stripes, and our mission is to reveal the truth behind commercialized gambling operators, um, to advocate for those who've suffered harm, to prevent more victims, and to champion policy reforms that stop predatory gambling. And I want to make clear that we do not accept financial contributions from commercialized gambling interests. So I always like to start briefly with kind of why I'm so passionate about this issue, why I've dedicated the prime years of my life to this. I grew up in Massachusetts, and like many of you, when you're in elementary school, one of the first things we learn about is the principle of no taxation without representation. It's one of our core democratic principles. Well, today, pretty much no matter where you live in our country, including in the state of Georgia, we have a system of taxation by exploitation. State governments are adding more and more extreme forms of gambling into the public square under the guise of raising revenues. But it's caused incredible financial harm and addiction for millions and millions of American families and hundreds of thousands of citizens in Georgia itself. So to us, like, we believe the institution of predatory gambling has proven itself to be a cruel and oppressive institution. And it's time that instead of debating more expansion, start to look at what is already happening both to the people of Georgia and across our country. So with that, I always like to start with a simple slide, like what predatory gambling is not. Okay, so it's because the commercialized gambling industry, when they testify before you, earlier this year, a lot of them like to blend all these forms of gambling under one umbrella. But what predatory gambling is not, it's not the Friday night poker game. It's not the local bingo night at the Catholic Church. It's not buying a square in the Super Bowl office pool. It's not, the March Madness brackets with your friends from college or the guys from work, or it's not a friendly wager on the golf course. Those are forms of gambling, but those are social forms of gambling. What predatory gambling is it's when powerful corporate gambling interests partner with state governments to use commercialized gambling, okay, to exploit and defraud citizens and their communities. So when gambling is run as a business, okay, and this is one of arguably the most important facts as you look at this industry compared to any other industry that comes before you, is that when commercialized gambling is run as a business, it creates a predatory and adversarial relationship between the gambling operator and the gambler. They're trying to take you down. The only time the gambling operator can win, the only way they're successful, is getting you to lose. And so it's a very perverse relationship, especially when it's done as a business. So my goal today in the few minutes I have with you, I'm just going to share a few truths with you about commercialized gambling, okay? And there's several more than these, but I'm only going to touch on a handful of them. But truth number one, and I think this is the most important one, is that commercialized gambling is highly addictive, but that's not why it's illegal, okay? It's illegal because it's a con. It's a form of consumer financial fraud in the family of price gouging and false advertising. That's what the house always means. That's what the house always wins. That's what it means. So it's not illegal in Georgia right now for us to have a friendly wager on a Falcons game or the Georgia Bulldogs game with each other. Like those social forms of gambling are not illegal. What's illegal is none of us can run the house. And if the state of Georgia were to legalize casinos or online forms of gambling, these forms of gambling are still going to be illegal with one exception. It's only legal if you get a regional monopoly in partnership with state government. For everybody else, it's illegal. And the reason why is because it's a form of consumer financial fraud. It's a con. So if you have it in Las Vegas, it's different. People hopping on a plane, not a big, not going doing it every day. But when you put Las Vegas on Main Street in Georgia, or you put Las Vegas into every smartphone in every dorm room in the state of Georgia, it becomes very different. It's that adversarial relationship where they're trying to take you down. Next slide here. So when people say, well, what does that mean it's a con? Well, this is the best image I've ever seen, just kind of capturing the math behind commercialized gambling, what the house always means, what it really means. And so this is what makes it different than any other business. So this is from, I think, one of probably the best book ever written on the modern gambling industry. It was called Addiction by Design by Dr. Natasha Shull, who was then at MIT and is now at NYU. And she had a graphic. The simple graphic shows on the left-hand side, you see the money. You start with a whole bunch of money, then over time, it's mathematically a guarantee that you're going to end up losing all your money, especially if you're in a playing against slot machines or other forms when there's a decent sized house edge. But it's inevitable that you're going to lose your money. Okay, and then the little graph below there shows that that's actually a slot machine experience with these high rapid gambling games are the most valuable, most profitable for the industry. It's why they want them so much. And so you start out, you certainly win a little bit along the way, but it's a mathematical certainty that the more you play the game and the more frequently you play it, you're going to lose not just a little bit of money, enormous sums of money. Okay, so that's why at its core, it's a con. And this con is really an extension of a government program. It's only legal, again, if you partner with the state, which kind of leads into truth number two. And this is probably on a personal level, kind of gets back to this theme of taxation by exploitation. Is, they're going to stand up and say, we're going to regulate this and so on. When there's a fundamental and irreconcilable conflict of interest between the state so-called regulating commercialized gambling, whether it's in the form of online gambling, regional casinos, or state lotteries, versus the public good. There's an inherent conflict of interest there that is fundamental, and there's no way around it, because the state, whether it's the state of Georgia or any other state, it is charged with protecting the public from the very business practices that generate more revenue for the state. So the whole reason, the major reasons why, the primary reason why the state gets into this business is they want the money. But if the state meaningfully protected citizens from predatory practices, there's no money in this business. Okay, it doesn't, by far, it's a huge loser for the state. So that conflict of interest, leads to this false claim that we're going to regulate this. It's like putting Dracula in charge of the blood bank. And I don't mean to be that sarcastic about that. It's the reality of it. It's the more money, you start off with $1 a week scratch-off tickets. Now you're selling $50 scratch-off tickets. And so a lot of citizens in Georgia and across the country, they're always amazed, that they think, I'm going to look at what's already legal in the state of Georgia, right? So when these guys stand up before you and say, we're going to regulate casinos, we're going to regulate online sports gambling for the public and protect people. Let's look at what the state of Georgia already does. And I could have done countless examples of this, especially how they market to kids. But this is just an example of what quote unquote regulated gambling looks like. This is the conflict of interest in its full glory. Okay, this is a $50 scratch-off ticket that's sold in low-income neighborhoods across the state of Georgia. Okay, as you know, the state of Georgia has a minimum wage of $7.25 an hour. That's the minimum wage for most citizens in the state. You got to work a full day's labor at a minimum wage job in Georgia before you can lose it in 5 seconds on what we're looking at is a government program encouraging citizens to buy $50 scratch-off tickets that are exempt from truth in advertising regulations. Again, predatory and adversarial relationship between the gambling operator and the gambler. This is in its full glory. This is what regulated gambling already looks like in Georgia. So these claims that you're going to regulate it to protect the public, it's not true. It hasn't been true for 30 years, and it certainly isn't true today in 2025. So the third truth here is, a major reason why so many families in Georgia don't experience financial peace. And I'm a huge Dave Ramsey guy. I think, his framing around, personal finance and all that, I believe in that. I got my family doing it, and millions of people across this country do it. Many of your constituents practice financial peace. The program pushed by Dave Ramsey, which is one of the top 10 podcasts in the country. So I use that phrase specifically on purpose. It's like your financial peace, not being in debt, being in a good place financially with your family. But many families don't experience financial peace in your state, many of your constituents, because of the extreme forms of commercialized gambling being sponsored by state government. This idea of selling $50 scratch-off tickets to citizens making $7.25 an hour. So let's look at what it looks like in totality in Georgia. So you've heard, like, the last couple of years, we've heard so many stories about, hey, the rising price of eggs and the impact it's having on family budgets in Georgia. There's got to be dozens and dozens of stories. This is one example of it. So let's look at what is the financial impact today, without even talking about these new forms of predatory gambling that lobbyists are trying to bring into your state, whether they're casinos or online gambling. Let's just look at what's happening right today in your state. So what's the financial impact of a government program, which is what predatory gambling is? Georgia citizens are on a downward spiral to lose $11.2 billion of their personal wealth to commercialized gambling sponsored by state government in Georgia over the next 5 years. Okay, $11.2 billion. Just in the last year, fiscal year, where numbers were available, these are all from the Georgia Lottery Zone annual reports. So in FY 2024, your constituents collectively lost $2.24 billion of their personal wealth to predatory gambling. Okay, again, particularly in the form of state lottery, the Georgia State Lottery. And to put that into a number that we can all relate to, that's $4,261 every minute that your constituents are losing to a government program in the form of predatory gambling. $4,261 every minute. Like, that's a heck of a lot of eggs. That's life-changing financial losses for tens of thousands, in many cases hundreds of thousands of Georgia citizens. And that's, talking about the future of bringing these new forms again. You want to calculate the losses to online gambling and casinos are even far greater than that. But the last truth I'll leave you with here, and then happy to take any questions, is because we hear a lot. Turn to the casino issue for a second. Besides the revenue aspect, we hear one of the main claims behind casinos in Georgia is, bringing them in. It's going to be an economic engine. You're a lower income community, you're an economically challenged region. We have an answer for you. Like, we're going to bring in casinos. And so, there's probably more than 1,000 regional casinos now across the country. The evidence is overwhelming about the impact they've had on this. And so I saw many of the speakers that were signed up prior hearings, and many of them had ties to the gambling industry. They have a financial interest in this stuff. So you're not really getting a kind of the full picture of it. And I'm always amazed when you see these, I think you have a sheriff from one town in Alabama, like, just look at the truth of this is, and this is from their own numbers. So the state of Pennsylvania, which is one of the biggest predatory gambling states in the country today, you go to the Pennsylvania Gambling Commission's, there's one of their own press releases. There were roughly 15,000 people that work at the state's casinos. Okay, and that includes part-time jobs. All right, so I think there's roughly 10 to 12 casinos across the state. Okay, and most people who are addicted to gambling, they never come forward for help. Okay, so it's like a tip of the iceberg. On there, they have something called a self-exclusion list. From a press release from the Pennsylvania Gambling Commission, said that there are more than 30,000 citizens have signed up, okay, for self-exclusion. So that number, 92% of citizens never come forward for help. So the fact that you had 30,000 people come forward and they said, these casinos in the state of Pennsylvania are ruining my life. You have to ban them from, I need you to ban myself from them, to voluntarily come forward for that. There's 15,000 people that work at the state's casinos, including part-time jobs. And so the actual amount of addicts is far greater than the amount of any kind of job that's associated with a casino. Okay, and so last point I'll leave to sign off with this is, many of the gambling operators that come before you and the gambling lobbyists, like, we like to call them the lifeboat men, like because it's very reminiscent of the famous scene. If most of you have seen the film The Titanic, so in the end of the movie, the boat is sinking, and you have this mad scramble, for the lifeboats. There's a very few amount of lifeboats, and you have all these wealthy guys who protect their own interests, who just care about their own interests. They're in the lifeboat. Okay. Meanwhile, thousands of people are drowning in the ocean surrounding them. and they all shield their eyes from the harm of it. So these predatory gambling operators, they're coming to you, despite the incredible evidence of, the financial harm their industry causes, the amount of massive addiction that it causes. They shield their eyes to all of that because their interests are protected. So many of the people that have come before this committee have a financial interest in having commercialized gambling, predatory gambling expand in your state. And so they're more carried about protecting their interests. So what I ask your committee and the members of the Georgia legislature is, there's tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of citizens in Georgia who are facing financial challenges. They need your help. And this is like the antithesis. Predatory gambling, expanding in the form of online gambling and casinos, it's the complete opposite of bringing help to them. So we need less lifeboat men and more legislators from all parties who stand up and say, we're going to put the interest of the people first over money. So that I appreciate the opportunity to say a few words today, and happy to take any questions.
Mr. Bernal, I appreciate you being here, and certainly appreciate your testimony, because I can assure you this committee has sought to see the full picture, and our doors have been open for any and all testimony for 4 meetings. So I appreciate you being here today. I do see a question, Chairman Stevens.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I appreciate your presentation today. We now have 12 states left out of the 50 that do not do sports betting, and that's basically what we're here today. From what I'm understanding, you're really opposed to any gambling or gaming at all. Would that pretty much sum it up?
No, actually, it's not. That's definitely not our position. Is let the people of Georgia do what they want. It's our people in Georgia are already free to place a sports bet. What's illegal is it's illegal to be the house in Georgia. So that's the main piece. What we want to see is state governments like Georgia get out of the gambling business, because it's been an epic policy failure when your constituents are losing, almost $4,200 every minute. When they're selling $50 scratch-off tickets to citizens making $7.25 an hour. The evidence is overwhelming. It's failed. So let the people of Georgia gamble freely. Allow gambling, free game. People gamble privately, locally, games in their homes, whatever they want to do. Take state government out of this business and put state government back on the side of the people of Georgia.
Follow up, Mr. Chairman, and I believe that's kind of where we're going. These 12 states that do not do sports betting specifically, they don't regulate it at all, which is, and the massive amount of money that goes offshore that's unregulated don't create any mechanisms for folks with problem gambling. I only want to go back to where we started, and this man to the right, the chairman here, voted on this bill back 32 years ago, and the first ticket was lottery ticket. Gambling ticket was June 29th of 1993. Since that time, 2.25 million Georgians, not anybody else from any other state, received the Hope Scholarship, and also 2.20 4-year-olds have gotten pre-K. That's nearly 4.5 million folks that have benefited. Do you have any comment on that at all, as far as the benefits that have come out of gaming?
Yeah. So I think it's fascinating when we talk about the financial harm that tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of Georgians have experienced here to this. So you have essentially middle class. When this is right from the Atlanta Journal-Constitution, has shown that a good portion of those college scholarships have gone to middle class and upper class families in Georgia, at the expense of hundreds of thousands of Georgians who are a lower income, who are losing almost $4,200 every minute to send a handful of Georgian citizens to college. It's like the American dream perverted. We're supposed to live in a country where we have no royal blood. We're all supposed to have an equal shot at this. And the idea that a handful of people benefit, that the so-called lifeboat men are benefiting at the expense of hundreds of thousands of Georgians, that's the antithesis of what government's supposed to exist for. We talk about having, this is the ultimate big government program. Take the government out of it. The idea that you need to have a state lottery to send kids in Georgia to college, it's a lie. The only reason, we all know politically, the only reason why they tied it to the Hope Scholarship, because there's no grassroots movement for a lottery in Georgia, or online gambling or casinos. They have to tie it to these carrots to create this impression that somehow the public is benefiting. No one in Georgia is paying less taxes today because the fact that citizens are losing, are going to lose with more than $11 billion of their personal wealth to predatory gambling, to the Georgia lottery, without even including these other potential forms. It's been an epic policy failure by almost every measure.
Thank you for your testimony.
Chairman Powell.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think my question had already been asked by my friend to the left of me, but are you saying that possibly we need to do away with the lottery in Georgia?
I'm telling you that the state lottery, states love to talk about their laboratories of democracy. That's one of the big things that Georgia and other states, most times we do these policies with the idea of improving people's lives. The idea that a handful of Georgians have benefited because they got some scholarships to go to public universities in the state, while hundreds of thousands of other citizens have suffered. Like, that's the complete opposite of what the role of government is supposed to be. The idea that it's been a cruel and oppressive institution. You start this. Why would anybody? Most of your committees support the idea of state government selling $50 scratch-off tickets in communities where people make $7.25 an hour. Like, let people gamble what they want to freely. This is the ultimate example of government overreach. In its purest form.
The question, if I might, you're talking about experiment in democracy. You do realize in Georgia that the panel that you're talking to today and all of the legislature, we can't legalize gambling. That's only left up to the people of Georgia through a constitutional amendment. People can hammer on all the legislators all they want to, but when we've seen the results of the lottery and we've seen the polls and we've seen everything else, it takes a constitutional amendment. So are you saying that we should deny the people of Georgia that opportunity to vote if that's their wishes?
I'm glad you asked me that question, because my background, before I did this work, when my primary background was in running political campaigns. And so one of the things I love to ask legislators is, because I hear legislators say, well, let the people vote on this, right? First of all, there's a reason why the forefathers had it in the Constitution to make it a very difficult threshold for an issue like this, to have to get approved. So there's a reason why it was in the first place. But think about for a second, if you this idea that we're going to let the people vote, it's a very disingenuous argument, because it's not like there's going to be a fair fight on this. The idea, imagine your own reelection, right? All of you work hard in your respective districts. If you had an opponent that's going to outspend you 3-1 in an election, you're going to say, no matter your merits, this is going to be a tough race. It's going to be really tough. I'm being outspent 3-1. Now imagine being outspent 10,000-1. And all of a sudden, we're going to stand up and say, oh, the people have spoken. The people have spoken, yet the proponents of this are going to spend tens of millions of dollars in your state to try to ram it across the finish line. The people of Missouri, okay, the gambling interests there in partnership with the pro sports teams, they spent more than $40 million in this last cycle to drag across a statewide referendum. They outspent opponents, like at least 200-1, 300-1, and they barely won statewide, like maybe 2,000 votes. There's no grassroots movement for this. So the idea that we're going to let the people vote, I would respectfully say to you, it's not it's not an honest argument, because it's a con. The idea that there's not going to be a fair fight here, there's not going to be real merits. Talking about the impacts it's going to have on Georgia families. All we're going to hear about is money for the Hope Scholarship, or jobs created and so on. So that's part of the con of this.
You speak about it being a disingenuous argument. You talk about the possibilities of money being spent, but it's been my experience, whether it be a political campaign for an individual or for a particular cause, that the public makes themselves informed. And, no matter how much advertising or whatever is spent, we've seen candidates that have run for office that spent untold amounts of money. But at the end of the day, it's all about the character and the platform. And that's the thing that I'm concerned when you talk about being disingenuous. And it sounds to me like you're almost saying that the public doesn't have a wit about them to differentiate.
Yeah. No, I think respectfully, I think the public knows very well what this issue is. And that's why there's no grassroots movement for this in Georgia. That the polls that you see, all this lobbying campaign is driven by powerful financial interests who stand to benefit immensely from this. That's why. So this isn't about letting the people vote. The real phrase for this is let us buy the vote. And so again, in your own reelection, you're telling me that despite your merits, you went on the ballot and someone else spent you 1,000 to 1. You would honestly say to yourself, someone who's been in politics for quite some time, that yeah, that was I got my message out. People knew what I stood for. And I would say respectfully, in most cases, I mean, in a state rep race, whatever, clearly it's a lot easier to get your message out. But statewide, someone's out spending you $40 million, $50 million. Again, I think it's disingenuous that somehow you're going to have a meaningful we don't need to speculate. Like the last 30 years, just look at the referendum campaigns that have been run on the gambling industry. They don't talk about the impacts of this. They're not going to talk about their business practices or any of that. They're going to talk about Hope Scholarship and, rescuing some community that's economically challenged, and not talk about the business in any way. I mean, there's nothing. I would say it's misinformation, frankly. It's the ultimate misinformation campaign. It's part of the con of this business.
Mr. Bernal, I'm so sorry to cut. We do have one more question. I want to get off of how disingenuous we may or may not be, and get this question on, because we need to get on to the next presenter. I promised everybody times today. Mr. Williams, do you have a question?
Mr. Chairman, I was listening very closely about what happens in statewide races, and my question, this is kind of a lead up. I remembered, to my great dismay, 2002, a sitting governor spent $22 million and an opponent spent $2 million, and the opponent won. So you'd always buy the election if issues are presented. My fear is this: we seem to have forgotten about prohibition. We tried legislating sin, that some folk call sin. It was a dismal failure. I have enough faith in Georgia voters that this con will not work if that's not their desire. What are your feelings about the difference in prohibition and the lack of, and today's question?
Sure. Great question. I appreciate it. And it's that kind of right. It's a great spot to end on. People in Georgia are already free to place a sports bet and to gamble. So this notion that the word prohibition is ever used is, again, part of this dishonest campaign pushed by gambling operators and lobbyists. It's already legal in Georgia for people to place a bet amongst themselves and gamble amongst themselves. What's illegal is to be the house. Okay, so when we talk about prohibition, that applies to alcohol. Gambling is already legal in Georgia. Our movement nationally for Stop Predatory Gambling is about abolition. It's about abolishing a state institution in Georgia and across our country of predatory gambling that is cruel and oppressive. Let people gamble what they want to. Get the government and these powerful corporations to stop exploiting the people of Georgia in their communities and their homes at the expense of all of us.
Mr. I appreciate you being here. Thank you.